Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 15th edition of IR Insight Live. I'm your host, Will Briganti from Nasdaq, and joining me today from Nasdaq's London office is Jeffrey Delamaciliere. He's an analyst in London with Nasdaq IR Solutions, and he's an expert on the French market. We're going to talk about that today. So, Jeffrey, thanks again for joining me. It's great to see you.
Good morning, Will. Thank you for having me.
All right. So 3 weeks ago, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, made an official visit to the United States. And since his election a year ago, can you tell us a bit about the policies he's implemented so far and what the perception is both domestically and internationally, so in France and then in the broader Europe structure?
Sure. So the election of Emmanuel Macron to the Élysée Palace in May last year certainly helped European markets to alleviate the fear of political risk in 2017. So on one hand, foreigners are investing money, financing a record number of new projects in France. Last year, we observed an almost like 50% rise compared to 2016, according to FDI markets data. On the other hand, domestically, opinion polls show a really divided country in face of Macron's pro-business reform agenda. In fact, his approval rating has been slipping to about like 40% last month. And this compares to 47% at the beginning of the year. Having the absolute majority at the Parliament and the Senate with his party, La République En Marche, Macron managed in the autumn to push for extensive reforms to the labor laws. However, he's currently encountering his first major test, with a number of strikes currently taking place, notably at the state railway company, as well as a number of student protests. While it is perhaps too early to quantify Macron's true effect on the French market, which certainly benefited from the general pickup on sentiment on economic growth in Europe, however, over the year, he clearly established himself as a determined and effective European leader, with France regaining investor confidence.
Okay. And then in terms of the French economy specifically, how has that been performing and how have French equities done lately?
Well, there is a real sense of economic momentum in France. French GDP for 2017 was up 2%, at its highest level since 2011. However, it disappointed slightly in the first quarter of 2018, up only 0.3%. The unemployment rate in France dropped to 8.9% at the end of December, which is the lowest jobless rate since the beginning of 2009. This is still relatively high when compared to the average across Europe at 7.3%. Finally, the state budget deficit fell under the 3% Eurozone target for the first time in a decade. Looking at French equities, well, they have performed relatively well since the election, with the CAC 40 large cap index outperforming both the Germany's DAX as well as the pan-European Euro Stoxx 50s over the past 12 months.
Excellent oversight. My final question for you, Jeffrey, today is, have you and the team observed any specific or particular changes or trends in terms of the ownership across the Nasdaq client base in France?
Sure. So Nasdaq Advisory works with a large number of publicly listed French companies on looking at the key changes across the shareholder base since the election of Macron in May last year. We observe a significant rise in investment from non-French institutions, notably US and UK based, which have been very positive towards French equities and have dominated the buying activity. Investors from these two countries appear to have a particularly positive view on Macron, who is like a popular figure in the US and one of Donald Trump's close allies. Also, the French economic policies on France's general positive momentum. In contrast, domestic investors have been selling. And finally, in terms of the profile of investors buying into French equity, growth investors have been dominant, perhaps viewing France's economic growth prospects more favorably.
Right, of course. Terrific oversight, as usual, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. Merci bien. We'll look to have you on soon. And it was a terrific overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Will.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this was Jeffrey Delamaciliere. He's an analyst at Nasdaq's London office with Nasdaq IR Solutions, and he's an expert with the French market. He was our guest today, the May 15th edition of Nasdaq IR Insight Live. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back to you on Thursday.